When struggling artist Daphne Reed saves a mysterious man from a street attack, she doesn't realize she's just stepped into the arms of her greatest mistake. As doors to the art world swing open and success rushes in, Daphne is pulled deeper into a web of charm, lies, and criminal deceit, until her signature becomes a weapon and her trust a liability. But in a world where shadows speak sweetly, can she reclaim her voice before it's lost for good? Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Rain slicked the pavement like black glass, reflecting the fractured neon of diner signs and street lamps. Daphne Reed hunched deeper into her coat, her sketchbook pressed protectively to her chest. The November air sliced through her scarf, and the city felt meaner than usual. She had just left the cafe where she worked part-time, used to work. Her boss had called her in to let her go, citing slow business and nothing personal. It always felt personal. As she turned onto 12th Street, a shortcut she usually avoided, she heard it. A shout, low and desperate, followed by the unmistakable sound of fists connecting with flesh. She paused. Another shout, this time more guttural, pleading. She crept closer, instinct overpowering caution. Just beyond the dumpsters, two shadows moved erratically under the amber glow of a flickering bulb. A man was on his knees, arms raised in a vain attempt to shield his face from the kicks of a larger figure towering over him. "Hey!" Daphne shouted before she could think. Her voice cracked the stillness like a bottle hitting concrete. The attacker whipped around and cursed, taking off in the opposite direction. Daphne remained frozen, her pulse pounding. The man on the ground groaned, then slowly pushed himself up, one hand clutching his side. "You okay?" she asked, stepping closer, still wary. He looked up. Despite the split lip and bruised cheek, there was something striking about him. His eyes, sharp and aware, locked onto hers. He gave a breathless laugh. "Guess you're my guardian angel tonight." Daphne offered him a hand. He took it, his grip warm and steady despite the circumstances. "Henry," he said, wincing as he stood upright. "Henry Cross. I owe you one." "Daphne. And you really don't. Just don't take that street alone again." He laughed again, softer this time. "Good advice. Can I buy you a coffee?" To say thanks properly. She hesitated. The night had already been long, and she should have gone straight home. But there was something magnetic about him, an unusual calm, like the eye of a storm. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to be alone tonight. "All right," she said finally. "One coffee." As they walked side by side toward the all-night diner on the corner, Daphne caught his sideways glance, measuring, curious, not quite what it seemed. But she dismissed it. After all, how dangerous could someone be when you've just saved them? The diner was half empty, humming with the soft clatter of dishes and the low murmur of late-night regulars. Daphne sat across from Henry in a cracked leather booth, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee while steam curled off the top of his untouched tea. He leaned back, one arm stretched along the top of the booth like they were old friends. The bruises on his face were already starting to purple, but he didn't seem to care. He talked easily, fluidly, about books, street art, cities he'd lived in, and people who changed the rules instead of playing by them. Everything he said felt just a little too smooth, but it was intoxicating. "I've seen a lot of people with your kind of fire," he said, stirring sugar into his tea with slow, deliberate circles. "But most of them let the world snuff it out." Daphne raised an eyebrow. "What kind of fire is that?" He smiled without showing teeth. "The kind that paints truth even when nobody's asking for it." She laughed, a little embarrassed. "You barely know me." "Not true. You jumped into a fight for a stranger. You're either incredibly brave or just reckless." He tilted his head. "Maybe both." Something about the way he said it made her sit up straighter. For so long, she'd felt like a background character in her own life, barely making rent, scraping by on commissions no one paid on time, carrying her sketchbook like it was armor. But Henry made her feel seen. By the end of the night, he'd slipped a business card across the table. No title, no company, just his name and a number. "You said your gallery gig fell through. I know people who might be interested in showing real work. Not that curated crap for rich tourists." Daphne stared at the card. It felt too easy, too good. But the sting of rejection still echoed in her gut. She didn't want to keep begging for scraps. The next morning, she mentioned Henry to Jade while they split a breakfast burrito on the park bench near campus. Jade, ever the skeptic, arched an eyebrow mid-chew. "You're trusting a guy you met in an alley?" "He wasn't the one attacking someone," Daphne said defensively. "That you know of." Jade wiped her hands. "Look, I'm just saying, he sounds polished. People like that don't usually hand out opportunities unless they want something." "Maybe he does," Daphne said, then regretted it. Jade didn't push, just gave her that look, half concern, half challenge. "Just don't disappear into someone else's version of your life, okay?" Daphne nodded, pocketing the card again. But her mind was already racing. Opportunity knocks in strange places. Sometimes it bleeds first. The gallery was in a part of town Daphne had only wandered through on late-night walks, where old warehouses wore murals like battle scars and broken windows were dressed up with vines. It didn't have a name out front, just a steel door and a discreet buzz-in system. When she arrived for her appointment, someone inside was already expecting her. Daphne Reed. A woman in a charcoal suit and crimson lipstick looked her up and down, not unkindly. "Henry speaks highly of you. This way." Inside, the gallery was all white walls and moody lighting, a curated dream space that made her palms sweat. She wasn't sure if she belonged or if she was being auditioned. Her paintings, 8 of them, were delivered a week later, after Henry insisted she let him handle the framing and transport. "Presentation is half the battle," he told her. "You just focus on the art." The show was titled Inheritance of Silence. Abstracts filled with bruised blues, rust reds, and the chaos of loneliness made visible in brushstrokes. Her work had always been emotional but never profitable. Until now. At the opening, people sipped wine and whispered in front of her canvases. Henry floated through the room like he owned it, which, for all she knew, he did. When he introduced her to a man in a midnight suit and diamond cufflinks, he said, "This is Daphne, the one I told you about. The real thing." The man nodded once and bought 2 pieces on the spot. Daphne could barely breathe. Later, out on the fire escape, Henry found her staring into the city's dark sprawl, her fingers still trembling from signing her first 5-figure sale. "See," he said, lighting a cigarette. "You just needed someone to open the right door." She looked at him then really looked. His suit was tailored but worn at the edges, like it had seen too many good nights and even better cons. His bruises had faded into faint shadows, and his eyes were still sharp. Too sharp. "Why me?" she asked quietly. He exhaled smoke. "Because you're not afraid of ugliness. That's rare in art and people." Daphne didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Below them, a limousine pulled up. Inside the gallery, another red dot was being placed next to her painting. She didn't see Jade that night. They hadn't spoken since the conversation in the park. Every time Daphne picked up her phone, a part of her hesitated. What would she even say? "Hey, I ignored your warnings and now I'm succeeding?" Instead, she let the silence grow. After all, Henry was right. This was what she'd always wanted. A chance. Even if it came dressed in shadows. 3 weeks after the gallery show, Daphne had money in her account for the first time in months. Real money. Enough to pay rent on time, stock her fridge with something besides instant noodles, and even splurge on a new set of brushes. But it wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of momentum. Like she had finally cracked open the world and found a place inside. Henry stayed close, always just a text or a half-step away. He took her to sleek rooftop parties, places filled with the hum of wealth and the scent of cologne she couldn't name. Everyone knew him. Everyone owed him something. Daphne felt herself orbiting his gravity more and more. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when he brought up the idea. They were sitting in a low-lit bar where every table looked like a secret. Henry slid a manila envelope across the table with a subtle grin. "I've got a client," he said, "who wants to invest in art, but discreetly. People like that don't want their names on walls or bank records. It's complicated. Legalish, but private." Daphne frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they'll buy pieces through you," he said smoothly. "We put the work under your name, they front the cash, and everyone wins. Clean transaction. They get anonymity. You get exposure. Maybe a little extra. She didn't reach for the envelope. "I don't know," she said. "This sounds—" "Look, Daphne." His voice dropped, gentle but firm. "The system isn't built for people like you to win. You think those gallery owners care about your art? They care about what it's worth to the right people. This is your shortcut." She looked down at her hands. Her nails were still stained with indigo paint from last night's session. She thought about her mom, who used to work double shifts and tell Daphne to draw whatever she wanted, as long as she had a backup plan. She thought about all the times people had praised her talent, but walked away without buying anything. Henry leaned in. "You trusted me once. I'm not asking you to break laws. Just step outside the lines a little." Something about the way he said it made her feel foolish for hesitating. She picked up the envelope. Inside was a single contract, pre-filled, her name typed neatly beside a figure large enough to numb any doubt. She signed it. That night, alone in her apartment, she stared at the empty space where one of her paintings had hung and wondered when exactly she had stopped asking questions. It started with a bounce payment. Daphne had just finished a new commission, an abstract landscape flooded with melting golds and fractured shadows. Henry had loved it, said the client would too. But when she checked her account the next morning, the deposit hadn't come through. Instead, there was an email from the gallery's assistant, apologizing vaguely. "Small delay. Should resolve soon." The next day, the assistant didn't respond at all. The gallery phone went straight to voicemail. By the end of the week, the website was offline. Daphne sat at her desk, scrolling through cached pages, trying to convince herself this was temporary. Maybe they were restructuring. Maybe Henry already knew and just hadn't told her yet. She called him. Straight to voicemail. She texted. Delivered. No reply. By the third day, her messages turned sharp. "Henry, where's the payment? The gallery isn't responding. Call me back. This is serious. I need answers." Nothing. She went to the building itself, the sleek white gallery where her paintings had once hung. The windows were dark. A paper sign taped to the door read, "Closed for renovation." There was no forwarding number. No one inside. That night, she opened the manila envelope again, the one she'd kept tucked in a drawer. The contract looked different now. Cold. Mechanical. She hadn't read it closely before, just trusted that Henry had filled in the blanks. Now those blanks stared back at her like traps she'd walked into blind. She found her name tied to multiple works that had never been displayed. She cross-checked signatures. Some were hers. Others didn't look quite right. A week later, a letter arrived from the Department of Financial Crimes. Thick. Official. It used words like investigation, unlicensed financial transfers, and shell accounts. Her name appeared 3 times. That night, she couldn't sleep. She pulled out her old sketchbook and flipped to the page where she doodled Henry's name beside one of her first paintings. She tore it out. Then another. Then another. The sound of ripping paper filled the apartment. When her phone finally rang, she snatched it up, desperate for his voice. But it was Jade. "I think we need to talk," she said. Jade met Daphne at a diner on the east side. One of those places where the coffee was always burnt and the booths were just sticky enough to feel real. It was the first time they'd seen each other in months. Daphne looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that settled into your bones and rearranged you. Her sketchbook sat on the table like a weight. Jade didn't speak right away. She just slid a manila folder across the table. "What's this?" Daphne asked, her voice dry. Jade looked her in the eye. A trail. Inside were printed articles, old business listings, and grainy photos. Names she didn't recognize at first, but all of them linked to one common detail. Henry Cross. Or rather, Harrison Klein. Or Nick Delaney. Or Julian Voss. Different names. Different cities. Same sharp jaw, same smile. Always with artists. Always with just enough charm to open a door before vanishing through it. "You've been tracking him?" Daphne whispered, stunned. "I started after you stopped returning my calls," Jade said. "Something about him never sat right. And when I saw one of your paintings posted in an article about a fraud case in Seattle last year, under someone else's name, I knew." Daphne looked down at the grainy photo. It was unmistakably hers. The curves, the texture. Even the faint blue smudge in the corner. She remembered exactly how it felt painting it, a lone, angry broke. But why me? Because you're talented. You're invisible to the people who matter. You're exactly the kind of person someone like Henry uses. Someone who won't make noise until it's too late. The diner buzzed around them, the world moving on like nothing was wrong. Daphne felt frozen, like her life had been hijacked, and she was only now seeing the steering wheel was never in her hands. I trusted him, she muttered. I thought he believed in me. Jade softened. He probably did, in his own messed up way. But he also believed you'd never catch on. Daphne's phone buzzed. A blocked number. She didn't answer. They sat in silence for a while. Then Jade said, "You're not the first. And you don't have to be the last." That night, Daphne went home and pulled every canvas she had from the closet. She lined them up in the living room and just stared. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She picked up a brush and started painting. Not for money. Not for Henry. Not for clients with hidden wallets. Just to remember who she was before someone else told her. They came in the morning. 2 plainclothes agents, all gray suits and thin voices, asking questions that landed like splinters. Did you know the buyers personally? Were you aware of the account opened under your name in Zurich? Can you account for these wire transfers? Daphne answered what she could. Her voice shook, but not from fear. From something colder, something hollow. Like guilt with no edges left. After they left, she sat on her bed for a long time, unmoving, the buzzing of the radiator the only sound in the apartment. The media came next. A quiet trickle of stories on blogs and social feeds. Rising artist implicated in laundering scheme. They used her full name. They posted her art. Some praised her work. Others called her a fraud. A pawn. A liar. Daphne didn't respond. Instead, she worked. Every day she painted. She turned the studio corner of her apartment into a war zone of color. Canvases stacked, brushes soaking, old bedsheets pinned to the walls to catch the mess. She painted late into the night, the windows open to let the cold air sting her awake. No clients. No commissions. Just her hands, her grief, and the questions she couldn't answer. Jade visited often now. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes silence. Most times, she just sat beside Daphne while she worked. One evening, Jade leaned in and said, "You should show these." Daphne shook her head. "No gallery wants me now. I'm not talking about galleries." She explained. There was a new space opening in an old auto garage on the South End. Run by people who knew what it meant to be burned, used, shut out. People who weren't interested in perfect reputations, just raw truth. Daphne didn't say yes. Not right away. But that night, she picked one of the pieces from the corner. A jagged burst of rust and violet, a figure trapped inside a shattered frame, and scratched a title into the back with the tip of her palette knife. Trusted Shadows. She stared at it for a long time. Maybe her name would never be clean again. But maybe, just maybe, her voice could still be clear. The garage still smelled faintly of motor oil and old tires, but it had been transformed. Concrete walls now held stories, grief carved in charcoal, resistance dripped in acrylic, hope stitched in mixed media. No spotlights. No velvet ropes. Just people, art, and truth. Daphne stood near the back wall, her hands in the pockets of her oversized coat. She wasn't wearing black like most artists did at openings. She wore slate blue, muted but honest. Her series stretched across the far wall. 7 pieces, all pulled from the chaos of the last few months. One was a self-portrait, though you had to look hard to see it. The eyes were fractured glass, the mouth stitched shut with threads of gold. Another piece showed a door ajar with fire behind it. Another, a faceless man offering a key. Above it all hung the title, Trusted Shadows. People lingered in front of her work longer than she expected. Some of them cried. Some didn't say a word. A few walked up to her quietly, just to say thank you. Not for the art, but for making something that felt like survival. When it was her turn to speak, Daphne stepped to the mic with her sketchbook tucked under one arm. The audience was small, maybe 30 people, but she felt their breath as one. I used to think success looked like a gallery wall and a name people knew, she began, her voice steady. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the wrong people open the right doors. And sometimes the path back isn't about clearing your name. It's about reclaiming your voice. She paused, scanning the room. No flashing cameras. No collectors waving checks. Just faces. Listening. I followed someone who promised light, she said. But it came from a fire, he said himself. I walked through it. And I'm still walking. Still painting. She stepped down to quiet applause. Jade met her with a hug that lasted longer than it needed to. For once, Daphne didn't pull away. Later, when the room had emptied out and the air was thick with the smell of oil paint and stale coffee, Daphne stood in front of her final piece. A woman walking alone across a cracked field, a long shadow trailing behind her. But up ahead, just past the edge of the canvas, was the soft suggestion of morning. She smiled to herself. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her frame.